Welcome to Success Your Own Way, a podcast about how real people define and redefine success throughout their careers. Hosted by Tina Shurick and Yifat Rogers, this show features candid conversations with guests who've made intentional choices, navigated change, and built lives aligned to their values. Their guests share their stories as well as strategies and tactics that help them along the way. Tina's a certified coach and a former corporate leader who supports professionals in making confident, values-driven decisions. Yifat is a consultant with a background in food science and engineering, helping people solve complex problems with a practical, no-nonsense approach. Each episode offers inspiration and actionable insights for anyone rethinking what success looks like in their life and how to get there.
To the 10th episode of Success Your Own Way. We're very excited to have you join us and been on the journey with us so far. And I will turn it over to Tina to introduce our guest today. Introduce Mark.
Yeah, this is a really special episode for us. Mark Weiler happens to be my brother, and we're excited to hear his story today. So I'll share a little bit more about Mark, and then we'll get into his story of success. So Mark and I were both raised in northern Wisconsin, and after earning his Bachelor of Arts in Marketing from Michigan State's prestigious Eli Broad School of Business, he joined Young and Rubicam Detroit Advertising on their Lincoln Mercury account. And then a few years later, he made a big move to San Francisco with a promotion from McCann Erickson, where he helped lead AT&T's transition into the digital wireless arena. This was back in the early 90s, if I remember correctly. Advertising introduced him to the world of television and radio production, where he began pursuing a full-time career as an actor. And after starring in several independent productions in San Francisco, he made another big move to Los Angeles, which at the time was the mecca of film and television production. At the time the world shut down in 2020, I think most of us can remember that, Mark had performed in hundreds of major studio-produced television shows and movies, as well as commercials, video games, and live plays. After getting married a few years ago, Mark prioritized a more stable and consistent career path, which led him to another passion in the food and beverage industry. After a few years of learning the industry at the Yard House, Mark was presented with the opportunity to start a wine tasting room for an award-winning Paso Robles winery. La Vigne Los Angeles opened its doors in 2023 and then added a kitchen in 2024. And they have since been recognized as Winery of the Year by both the Central Coast and New York International Wine Competition. So a very prestigious winery that Mark is now managing. So that was a little taste of what Mark has been up to over his career. I happen to know that there's a lot more to the story. So I'll ask you, tell us if you can run through some of the jobs or roles that you've had beyond these opportunities that you've had through your life that have really led you to where you are today.
Sure. Yeah, I was also a student manager at our local pharmacy. I was the owner of an underground sprinkling installation company where I learned how to run my own company. I was a copy machine salesman. I was a bouncer. I was a DJ. I was a casino player, a hired casino player. I worked as a production assistant. I was a natural food distributor. I was a day trader, still do some day trading. I was an Uber driver. I was a host. I was a server. And that led me to being the manager of the wine tasting room that I am now.
That's a pretty amazing history with lots of twists and turns. We've had a few guests on, 9 other guests. I don't think any of them could match up even close to the numbers of different roles that you've held, Mark. It's awesome.
Okay.
So Mark, kind of as you're reflecting, and we know that things change over time, but how would you say the plans for your life lined up with your actual life experiences?
Well, yeah, I assumed I was going to be rich, thin, and have a full head of hair. So, right off the bat, not exactly lined up. I think I was also planning on playing Division I basketball and maybe even be in the NBA for a while, but that didn't match up. And then I was going to be an Academy Award-winning actor, but you don't really realize that other people's dreams and visions are also required to make that happen, and they might be doing everything they can to not let that happen. So, a lot of lessons along the way. Perhaps, at least I set the bar high, even if my expectations didn't line up and land on all the right dots.
I'm gonna, Tina, I'm gonna a bit of a curveball. So we usually have, how do you define success for yourself? And I will change it a little bit with thinking about a couple of roles you had, 2, 3 roles. How did you define success for those specific roles? Were they kind of like the regular definition, or did you, what was your definition of success in those 2 to 3 roles?
And you just mean roles in life, or like acting roles, or?
Yeah, so either acting role or what does success look like for you today as a manager of a winery? What did it look
Sure.
like before, when you were in advertising?
Yeah. I think I can probably break it down to 3 distinct different moments of definition of success. I think when I was up until 27, it meant doing what Tina and my parents expected of us. Get good grades, get into college, get a good job, and then work for one company for the rest of our lives. And that was how we were raised. And we went along that path. And then by about 27, I decided that, I needed to forge my own path. I was my own man. I was taking care of myself, and I needed to do it my way at that point. So kind of, I would say I started following my bliss around that time. I knew that I had to make enough money to survive with basic essentials. It was also important to me to be debt free while doing it. So it required a lot of sacrifice, but I didn't want to be the guy who was just making money for the weekend, and then I'd go buy furniture on the weekend, not because I needed furniture, but because I could, because I had this money and I'm going to buy a couch now. That wasn't fulfilling to me. So being able to go on adventures, I'd say that's the time that I started pursuing the full-time career as an actor. So just looking for that next gig, having time and flexibility to spend time with my friends, to travel, pursuing something of a higher purpose. I would say that up until 27, I was also selling products that I didn't believe in. Lincoln Mercury is a fine company. I think both my parents have Lincolns now, but it didn't mean anything to me at the time. And I couldn't get around it. And I couldn't get around when I was working for AT&T, that I just pictured this Death Star, the giant, their logo is the Death Star. And it's like, I work for the Death Star. So I did some deep soul searching, and I decided that what I believed in was myself, and I was going to bet it on myself, that I was going to be successful doing it my way, selling myself as a brand at that time. And then I got married, and I grew up late. Probably I got married in my, I think, late 40s. And so success now has changed again, and now I'm just trying to keep up with my wife, who works 3 jobs, and she's very successful at all 3. And we like being able to spend money without hesitation. We don't ever question, like, should we really be buying this? Should we really be going out and spending $250 on a meal? We don't even think about it. It's like, we want to go out. We want to have a good bottle of wine. We want to have a Michelin star meal. We're going to do that. And then we're also probably saving for a house, and maybe even for the first time in my life, thinking about retirement and having a nest egg that I can relax with at some point in my future.
Yeah.
I like how the definition of success just looks a little different, and even throughout our lives, and you've had all of these different experiences and turning points. Because every point has kind of its own definition. So it's not necessarily even a continuous. There's some iteration and things that we learn, and we're like, yeah, I thought that would be fulfilling, or that would be my definition of success, and then we're like, this is not really it. And kind of reinventing, and you've reinvented yourself multiple times throughout your career.
Yes.
Yeah. I was just going to add on top, the volume of different roles that you've played career-wise is pretty vast. And I think, when I talk to folks in my clients, as well as folks in my network, what I find is a lot of people are really hesitant to make the volumes of changes that you have been able to make in your career. And so I'm curious, what do you think is maybe different about how you approached your life and career than many do, where they're comfortable sitting in that 9 to 5 that isn't fulfilling but is filling their paycheck? What do you think was different about your decision making or your philosophies and that caused you to be so courageous to make so many different moves?
Yeah, not to get too dark or philosophical, but I've always had a keen sense of mortality. I mean, I've been highly aware of the finite nature of my life for a long time, and I didn't want to waste my life doing something that I didn't believe in. I've been envious of people who can turn off whatever part of that brain is in there that just allows them to go out and sell a product that they don't believe in, that allows them to work in a toxic work environment, that allows them to um, just grind it out and then be able to come home and turn back on the switch of, okay, now I'm off work and I can finally relax and I can finally do the things that I want to do, that I enjoy doing. I always wanted to at least be enjoying what I was spending my time doing, whether or not it was making a lot of money or a little money, or, I just can't sell a product that I don't care about.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'm gonna switch gears a little bit to readiness. So we've had a
Okay.
little bit of a pre-conversation about that, and what I shared is oftentimes, and when it was time for me to become a consultant, just the feeling of, am I ready for this change? And always, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. You've made these changes, so at some point you decided either, I'm ready and I'm going for it, or I'm not ready and I'm going to go for it anyways. What kind of How did you decide? How did you feel? Did you feel ready? If so, how did you get ready? How did you jump in? I think that is the part that, for me, when when I hear you talk, is a little bit of like, oh my gosh, was he ready for all of these?
Yeah,
What
no,
went
that,
through
that
your
you're,
head?
yeah, leaving advertising, the first, my corporate job was probably the biggest leap of faith, if you want to call it that. And every time I'd even kind of hint that I was thinking of quitting or whatever, they'd give me a raise, they'd give me a promotion, they'd give me an award, they'd give me a expense account, and I was like, okay, I can stick it out for another 6 months or something like that, and I did, and the 6 months would come and go, and it was like, no matter what they gave me, I was still like, this is not how I want to be spending my time. So at the point I made the jump out of the corporate world, I do feel like I was ready and I believed in myself and I just trusted the process and just jumped in. And you know, bravery doesn't mean that you're not scared. It just means being scared and doing it anyway.
Mhm.
And I do have a lot of confidence in myself. I always have, and so I believed it was going to be okay, even if our parents didn't think it was going to be okay, and they were worried about me and my decisions. I knew I was going to be okay. I knew that I was going to have a roof over my head. I knew I was going to be able to eat, and I sacrificed a lot at the same time. I was very aware that I needed to make sacrifices and was willing to do so. Um, and I wasn't going to do dumb things like take out $100,000 loan, or even a $20,000 loan to be able to fund it. I was just going to sacrifice and just get by. And I think that it's important for people to recognize their fears. They recognize even what their MO is. If they're coming from a place of pain avoidance, or they have a poverty mentality, or even a sense of entitlement. I see this with a lot of younger people right now who think that society owes them something. Society owes no one anything. Everyone has to contribute something of value to other human beings. And I think that's also important. It's contribute something of value, something that people are willing to pay for. Otherwise you're just a leech on society and people will treat you that way. And so you kind of have to know where you're coming from. And so if you have something that you believe in that just seems scary, but you know that it's of value to other people, then jump and realize that you have to work. You still have to work. Nothing's going to be handed to you, and you have to sacrifice. But if you believe in what you're selling and you believe it's of value to other people, you just trust the process and jump and do what you do best.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Trust the process.
Yeah, you're talking to the process lady here. Yifat
All right, great.
Your Eureka framework. I was also
Right.
your commentary, Mark, was causing me to reflect on a previous guest that we had named Paul Benke, and he was talking about coming from a place of abundance versus a place of scarcity, and how just that mental model can really shift what you're drawn towards.
Absolutely.
Pulling on the thread of being drawn towards, I think our listeners may be interested in learning more about your acting career, because it's a different career than any of our previous guests have been talking about here. I'm wondering if you could share some misconceptions that you may have had about becoming an actor, and any that surprised you or held you back or anything like that.
Sure. Yeah, there were a lot. I moved to California at the time. I had friends who were like, I'm like, they wanted to move to California. I said, great, Los Angeles. They said San Francisco. I said, same thing. I had no idea. I had no idea that how vast this state is and how many different communities there are that are very different from each other. And then when I got to LA, I certainly had no concept of how Hollywood worked. I just assumed that if you were talented and interesting, that was all that it mattered. And I do think that actually was probably how Hollywood was in maybe the 90s or earlier. Like, you could have a guy like Al Pacino play a Cuban and people bought it, and he could put on a fake accent, and that changed over the last 25 years since I got here. The people don't want accents anymore. They don't want a white guy or an Italian guy playing a Cuban. Like, they want authenticity. They don't want they want people to play themselves, which was uncomfortable for me, because the whole reason I wanted to be an actor was I wanted to be other people. I wanted to do all these other things, but in reality, that's not what they're buying here. They want authenticity. They want you to be your most authentic self. The human branding, like you are a product in Hollywood. It's probably true in other places, to other industries, but your brand is what you're selling, which is why you see so many people now becoming successful off of TikTok or YouTube or doing their own skits. That creates their own human brand. And if you're looking to get hired by somebody and you're putting yourself out there the way that I was, it really is based on looks. And I think people have known that for a long time. Maybe I didn't. Maybe it took me a long time to figure that out. But people look at me. I had casting directors say to me, like, Mark, when we see a script that says, a misogynistic cop, we think of you. We see racist cop, Mark Weiler, perfect racist cop. And I'm like, thanks. I don't know. It's nice to be thought of at all, I guess. But it is based on how you look and people perceive you. So I'd say those were some of the main misconceptions, and we talked about mentors yesterday. There are a lot of people here disguised as mentors who are just shysters. A lot of people are always looking for their next gig, so they sell themselves as a mentor, and really they're just taking your money. And and there's a lot of other people who are well-meaning, but they're trying their best, but they don't understand the circumstances. So it really is a lot about finding your little circle and inventing your own brand here.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think you're uncovering things that many of us thought were there in Hollywood, but really the fact that you have this lived experience, I think is really important. And I actually think those of us who have come from a corporate environment may have seen some of the same types of behavior from managers. Nepotism is rampant, being pigeonholed into particular roles that just because you're good at it doesn't mean that necessarily like continuing to do it. I know I've experienced some of that myself. And so I think there are some parallels here between what you've experienced probably on an amplified basis in acting in Hollywood relative to corporate America too. It is everywhere, but man, it's really exponential, I think, in the industry that you're coming from. So
yeah, and I can speak to that from my corporate experience too, because at Young and Rubicam, I was doing automotive price point advertising in newspapers, and it was, if anybody remembers the 90s, it was a big newspaper ad that had a picture of a car and it said, "Hurry in, here's the price," and it was boring to me. I didn't care, and I saw them doing Detroit Tigers TV ads down the corridor, and I'm like, I want to do that. That looks, I like baseball. I like film production. That looks more exciting. And they're like, no, you're good at, here's the car, here's the price. And then I left to go to San Francisco, and more progressive city, more at the time, especially burgeoning technological advancements in San Francisco as opposed to Detroit. And they're like, oh, you know how to do price point advertising? Great. We're doing AT&T. So it's a picture of a phone with a price. And I said, oh God, I really need a job. So I guess I'll take it. But yeah, it wasn't what I wanted to do, but that's how they pigeonholed me in those first 2 corporate jobs.
Yeah.
As we're wrapping up, I guess my last question is if you think of, a tip or advice you can give to someone who's, burnt out, I want to do something different, potentially outside of my comfort zone. What could be like 1 or 2 things they can do, they can ask, they can research, action they can take?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is getting yourself right. I think you can do a lot of research. There's plenty of resources where you can go and find out what other people are doing to make it work. But from my standpoint, a lot of it is just your mental attitude. People who live in fear, you have to recognize, am I coming from a place of fear? Am I coming from a place of poverty? Am I looking to just avoid conflict? Am I just entitled? Am I an entitled brat? Am I just, is that why I'm not happy where I am right now? And then, if you understand that you feel destined for something else out of a place of empowerment, then you have to realize that it requires some risk, and it requires hard work, and it requires sacrifice. And for me, I'm willing to start at the bottom again. When I started my journey, I knew nothing. I would cook for myself, but I knew nothing about the restaurant business. So I started as a host at the bottom, making minimum wage and no tips. And then I would ask questions, and I would tell people, like, I want your job. I want your job as a manager. I want your job as a server. How do I get there? And they were excited, because most people are just there to collect a paycheck. So I started at the bottom. I was willing to humble myself and risk starting over and work hard and make sacrifices. And then if you follow your bliss and trust the process, it's going to work out. You have to trust it, and it's going to work out. And then you also can't be too proud to say, I made a mistake, or I've changed, and then reinvent yourself again. Because that's what I've done at least twice, maybe more than that. So.
Yeah,
I think so. Yes, you're kind of an expert at reinventing yourself. And so I know you're working at and managing La Vigne Winery right now. If people want to learn more about you, more about La Vigne, where can they go?
Yeah, lavignewinery.com. I'm specifically in Los Angeles, but we're working hard to be a cohesive team between the Paso Robles winery, and it's been there for decades, and us, who's the new kid on the block, trying to create a wine environment in Vernon, California, which, believe me, there is not there was nothing like this before we started. It is an industrial warehouse district, and we're fortunately drawing people in. They're willing to drive in from the outskirts of the city and from different counties to come check out our wine and have an authentic wine tasting experience that they would get in Paso or Napa or Temecula, but right there in downtown LA.
Awesome.
Good. Well, we're going to close. Thank you, Mark, so much. I feel like we brought 3 guests to this episode and not just one, given the invention and reinvention. It was fascinating. To our listeners, thank you. If you found this episode inspiring or thought-provoking, please share it with a friend or 2 or 10. We also have a YouTube channel called Success Your Own Way. So go ahead, subscribe there, follow us on all channels possible. And of course, thanks, Tina, for getting both our guests and for your partnership on this podcast.
Likewise. Mark, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate you spending the time with us.
Yeah, thank you. It's been an honor. I appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you for joining us on Success Your Own Way. We hope you found this episode inspiring and took away actionable insights. Please tune in for our next episode. And if you know someone who is rethinking what success looks like in their life, please share this episode with them.